Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day. Making sure everything's working here. If you are on Facebook or YouTube, would give me a quick hello in the chat. Just let me know it's working, and we'll get started here in just a moment. I have a little bit of a cough going on. I think it's just my allergies, but it's giving me fits for a little bit. Hi, Miss Judy. Good evening. Thanks for letting me know you're here and it's working. Good to have you with us. All right, so I know YouTube is working now. Anybody on Facebook that can give me a quick hello, let me know for sure it's working. After last week's fiasco, a little nervous about the connection and everything. Those that might have been on last week and wondered what happened, I just lost internet here at the house. And sometimes when the internet goes up and down, I just keep going, and when the internet catches back up, it'll send things through. But it didn't last week. It just died. So, but we're up and running today. Looks like a good stream connection at the moment. So we'll wait just a moment, make sure Facebook is working, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, maybe we just don't have anybody on Facebook. That could be it too. It may not be that Facebook's not working. It may just be that no one is joining at the moment. Oh. I did want to kind of continue our theme tonight with this morning's theme, kind of that week of Halloween and all the current obsession people seem to have with scary things. Hey, Christy. All right, thanks for letting me know. Okay, so it is working because Christy can see it. And got her scary face on, I believe is what that is. But with everybody's current fascination with scary things, I noticed on the way to church this morning plenty of Halloween decorations. And it seems that Halloween may be starting to rival Christmas as far as decorating goes. But so I thought this week, kind of going along that idea of Halloween being Saturday and us being bombarded probably all week with scary movies, scary commercials, lots of spiders and other things like that, did I do some scary stories tonight. So we're going to do a couple quick games about some scary stories from the Bible. A lot of times we think of scary stories as being kind of a Hollywood phenomenon. They like to make the scary movies. There's plenty of creepy tales and eerie things that appear right there in Scripture that happened way before Hollywood was around. And we're looking at a couple of those tonight. Thought that might be fun. Excuse me. So with that said, just as I say that, my internet connection goes red. So hopefully we won't have too many problems here. But just about to say, I think we'll go ahead and get started. If I can get my throat cleared up, and we'll just jump right into it. Don't see anything really messing up my internet at the moment, so all right, let's get going. Let me find our slides here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a scenario, a part of a story, and you have to try to tell me who it is or answer the question at the end. So we're going to start off with the one I think is fairly easy. Hopefully it is. There's a man in a dungeon surrounded by lions. He's there all night. Who is he? So we'll look at the story in more detail in just a moment, but that's all I'm giving you for the moment. A man in a dungeon surrounded by lions. He's there all night. Who is he? All right, getting some answers coming in. Hi, Carol. Glad to know you're here. All right, so I got a couple in. All right, everybody that I know of that's on has answered, and everybody has gotten it right. Of course, that's Daniel, and we know that from the book of Daniel, chapter 6, verses 19 to 21. This is after he's already been thrown in. After he spent the night there, this is the next morning. In verse 19, it says, "Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste into the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angels, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt." And that, to me, that just seems like as dramatic a scene as you can get. Here the king obviously had been kind of tricked, if you want to put it that way, manipulated into making this law that those around him knew would end up having Daniel break it, and make the punishment to be cast into the lion's den. So the king didn't want to do it, but he had already signed the law and was kind of held by his own integrity to uphold the law for everyone. Throws Daniel in, and you can see that next morning his concern for Daniel, his love for Daniel. And he gets up early to say, okay, he's been there overnight. If he's still alive, I'm bringing him out. And can you imagine that? The king, yelling down into the lion's den, for someone that was thrown there last night, saying, Daniel, are you there? That had to look crazy to everyone around him, didn't it? Everyone that's just standing there saying, hey, king, he was there all night. He's not likely to still be there. Hi, Stina. How are you? Thanks for letting me know you're here. Good to have you with us. And so I can imagine everybody looking at the king going, yeah, I don't know why you're talking to this to the lion's den there. And I also kind of wonder if maybe Daniel, it depends on their relationship, maybe he waited just a few moments before responding just to kind of give the king a little bit of a hard time. And and then he speaks up and says, "O king, live forever." And it gives him an address that's suitable for that time period and for his rank and for the king with his position. And so that's the first one. We'll jump right into the next one, but that's a good story there. It sounded like one of those scary movies you might get where you have to spend all night in a room full of dangerous creatures. Yeah, it's just Daniel and the Lion's Den. That's all that story is. All right, next story. A stone has been removed from a grave, and a man is walking out, bound with grave cloths. His sister worries he will stink after 4 days dead. Who is he? All right, so here's your story. Here's your scene. They've moved the stone back from a grave, and this man comes walking out with all his grave clothes on, and even says he has a napkin wrapped around his head. And his sister's going, no, wait, he's been dead 4 days. He stinks. And who is he? Who is this person we're talking about? Alright, got an answer coming in. Maybe a few more on the way. I'll give everybody a chance to answer before I show it. Alright, couple of answers. Alright. Alright, so I think we got all the answers, at least the people that have let me know they're on. And I think I did kind of be a little tricky with this one. I was intending to be tricky with this one, with the stone being rolled away and coming out of the grave. The clue in this one that makes it distinctly, let me give the answer, Lazarus, is the comment from his sister about him being dead for 4 days. So obviously Jesus came from a grave. The stone was removed, and the tomb was empty. But in this case, it was the story of Lazarus, and we see that story in John chapter 11, verses 38 to 44. And it says, Jesus therefore again, groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Jesus said unto her, Said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldst believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave cloths, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus said unto them, Loose him, and let him go. So that's the story of the raising of Lazarus there from the book of John. And I didn't give the whole passage there because I didn't want. We've got several stories to go through, so I didn't want to go into too much detail with each one. But you'll remember Jesus was very close with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. They were Mary and Martha were the sisters of Lazarus. And I think it was, which one did it say? It was Martha that, yeah, it was Martha that was complaining about the fact that Lazarus is going to stink by now. He's been dead for 4 days. But Jesus had already spoken and said, hey, don't you believe that I can give life to those that are dead? And she had said, yes, I know that. She was thinking about the resurrection in the future and how he was offering eternal life and forgiveness of our sins. And Jesus was explaining to her that he can do that then, he can do that now. And that's one thing I want you to remember this week. If God can do so many different things. We see all these miracles, and sometimes we look at the power God has, and we just kind of, we think, well, that's what God does, in the Bible stories. That's what God does for super Christians, or that's what God does for people of great faith. No, that's what God does, period. And he can do that for us. When we have challenges in our life, when we face that unexpected death that they had of Lazarus there, or we face that lion's den that we just talked about with Daniel, we have a God that's there and can overpower that and works on our behalf. So let's keep that in mind. So yeah, Hollywood story here. You can kind of see it. Probably the lighting would be a little bit darker just to give it more effect than it probably actually was in the actual story. But the stone being rolled away, everybody's kind of standing there looking at it, and then out comes walking Lazarus, not as a zombie, not as a ghoul, but alive and well and ready for these grave clothes to come off of him. All right, next story. Still nothing on Hollywood here, right? It's great stories. A king wakes up one morning to find 185,000 corpses of his army. He decides to leave and go home. Who is he? All right, now this is supposed to be the hardest one of all. If you get this one without even having to do any digging or whatever, then you get bonus points. And you also get bonus points if you spell his name right. But so yeah, this king comes to battle. He brings his army. He's been destroying city after city after city, and they go to sleep one night expecting to get up the next day and destroy another city. I won't tell you what city that was. They're ready to destroy another city. And when he wakes up, 185,000 of them are just dead. And he decides, this is not the place for me. I'm going to leave. I kind of imagine it being like you seen that commercial? Oh, I want to say it's Geico, I think, because it has a little lizard gecko thing in it. Where the man's upstairs and he's like, congratulations on your new house. And he looks around, there's like all these spooky dolls or whatever. And the gecko says, well, enjoy your new home. And the fellow's like, nope. And he walks out like, I'm not even gonna do this. That's kind of what I can see the king the next morning going, nope, it's time to go. All right, so Carol's shrugging her shoulders here via emoji. I told Daniel the lion's den was easy, and I was going to try to get harder from there on. So, although this one is probably the hardest, the next one's probably easier than this one. But nothing like waking up to find 185 of your closest friends all lying there dead, huh? That's a horror story. That's the best of any apocalyptic movie you could have, is wake up and that much destruction around you and you heard nothing. All right, not getting any answers here. I'm guessing this was probably pretty hard to look up even, because I didn't give you any names or anything to even search by, did I? All right. Well, if somebody maybe put in an answer, but I'm going to go ahead and give the answer on this one. This is Sennacherib, king of Assyria. And we'll look at the passage here in a moment. But Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, they were dominating the entire region. In fact, they had already destroyed the northern kingdom, which was referred to as Israel, and it carried them away into captivity. and had come to the southern kingdom, which was referred to as Judah. As you'll recall that the nation of Israel had split into two kingdoms after Solomon's death, and he tried to attack the southern kingdom, wanted to attack the southern kingdom, and God had already told the southern kingdom that they were going to be destroyed, but they had had several good kings that led them back to God, and so God wasn't ready for them to be captured yet. And so let me pull up the scripture here. 2 Kings 19, you have King Hezekiah here, and he's basically called out to God to say, Lord, help us. Sennacherib was the Assyrians at that point had destroyed everything around. They were the world power. And they're sitting at their doorstep outside the walls of Jerusalem there. And he's called out to God to say, help us. We don't know what to do. And we pick up in verse 32 where Isaiah is giving a prophecy from God. And he says, therefore, thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into the city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it, for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake. Now let's go on for just to stop for a moment before we read the rest of it. We're going to read the next couple verses as well. Can you imagine that? You're in a city, a walled city, surrounded by the world power at that time, knowing they could easily probably come in and destroy you. Oh, Christy found it. All right, she Googled it. All right. We'll see in a moment if you got the spelling right there. But knowing they could come in any moment, and you call out to God, and he answers the prophet saying, no, I'm going to protect you. That army you see outside your doorstep, they're not coming in here, not this time. And he's going to turn around, he's going to go back the way that he came. That in itself would be powerful, but it would also take some faith to believe it, wouldn't it? I mean, if you're still sitting in that city, aren't you still kind of going, okay, God, but can you give me a little bit of how? Can you give me a little bit of what you're going to do? What do you want me to do in this fight? But God just says, I'm going to defend you because of David, because of the way he led the people and was close to me. And then in verse 35 it says, it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 180,000. When they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. So, all right, Christy, you got the spelling right on that one. Good job. I couldn't have told you if it was right or not until I saw it on the slide because I knew I copied it out of the Bible there. But that's how God did it. God didn't say, okay, if you go out and fight, I'll help you. If you go out and do this, God actually fought on their behalf, and he sent an angel. Very similar to the story of of Exodus, when they were coming out of Exodus and that last plague, the death of the firstborn for anyone that didn't have the blood on the doorpost. And the angel just comes through and went throughout the camp, and that 185,000, I'm doing the math right, that would be 185,000. Can you imagine how big the army was that killed that many, and there were still others to wake up and find them dead? Obviously one of those being Sennacherib, the king, so I just love that verse 36 where it says, so Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria at that time, and so he just basically went home. The next verse, which I didn't include just for the sake of time and space, tells us that he, while he was back home, he went to worship in a temple, worship one of his gods, or his main god in a temple. And two of his sons turned on him and killed him. So he died shortly after this. He never did invade Judah and capture them. And that just shows when God makes a promise, he does. Now, you may recall, wasn't Judah eventually captured? Yes, they were captured by the Persians and carried away. After that subsequent kingdom that took over after the Assyrians. But God said Sennacherib is not going to set foot in this city. And he kept his promise. And so kind of going back to the idea of scary stories, can you imagine that scene? You're there in the city walls, and you're fearful for your life because some of the descriptions of how the Assyrians would go through an attack were brutal. They were a vicious army. They would obviously just kill a lot of people, and so you're sitting there thinking, oh, if they get through these walls, there's no telling what will happen to me. And you're waiting all night long, and you don't hear anything. There's no sound of battle. God hasn't told you to go out and fight, and you're saying, okay, God, what are you doing here? You ever go through those moments? You're kind of like, okay, God, you said you were going to work, but I don't see you doing anything. I think I've been there plenty of times. inside those walls while the angel's out there doing his thing, and I have no idea what he's doing. And the next morning you wake up and there's all these dead bodies. I mean, hopefully you don't see dead bodies in your situation, but the problem is resolved, and God has worked on our behalf, and that's why we're to call out to Him, because He can work in situations that seem impossible. This was an impossible situation. Judah had no way to fight off the Assyrians at this point, but God fought for them. And then there's a Hollywood scene. I can just imagine looking out over the valley surrounding the walls of Jerusalem, and there's all these dead Assyrian soldiers just lying there, and the generals and the king kind of trying to figure out what just happened. And then that commercial I mentioned going, nope, time to go home. So, all right, so that's our third scary story. Hopefully you're enjoying these. I just thought they made really good stories like you might find during this time of year, and really fit that style of what you see on TV now. Sometimes just as gruesome. I mentioned this morning I had a hard time finding graphics for the scary scene there, just because a lot of times everything is more violent than scary really these days. But it doesn't get much scarier than that, much more horrific than that to see that scene that the Assyrians would have seen there, and that was just God dealing with them, saying, "You're not attacking my people." Not without me telling you to take action. All right, next story. I think this might be our last one. I don't remember. A king is throwing a party when part of a man's hand appears writing on the wall. So there's two questions this time. Who is this king, and who interprets the message? So there's two parts to this question. They're having this party. They're still, out celebrating. They're drinking a lot, as we'll see. And all of a sudden, a part of a man's hand appears, writing on the wall. And the king sees the hand. He sees as it's going and as it's doing it. Who was that king? And who do they call to interpret the message? You can answer either or both of those. Bonus points if you spell the king's name right. Tried to make these questions kind of like a whodunit type of a thing. So, all right, Carol's got her answers in. That was quick. All right, she's got half her answers in. Alright. King throwing a party. A hand shows up out of nowhere and starts writing on a wall. I can't imagine how frightened that would be. It'd be one thing if a man all of a sudden just appeared out of nowhere and starts writing on the wall, but it was just the hand. That to me is better than any kind of Hollywood fright scene you could come up with. Alright, Miss Judy's got her answers in. Alright, so I think we're getting close to everyone here. And I'm checking spellings here to see how everybody spelled all this. Alright, so we got 3 different spellings on the king name so far, even though everybody agrees that the king was Belshazzar, and that Daniel is the one that wrote it. But let's see. Miss Judy got Belshazzar spelled right. Oh, Carol, you got too many L's in there. And Christy went with kind of the more, like she knew him friendly. Hey, Belshazzar. She's a little, they're friends, so she just calls him Belshazzar. But, alright, so y'all got that right. I didn't throw anybody off with that one. And yeah, that's the story. Daniel chapter 5. Lots of interesting stories happen around Daniel. If you remember the other stories, there's the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace. That to me is as horrible as a horror movie can get. Them being in there and coming out unscathed. But Daniel chapter 5, Christy said, and copy and paste. All right, we'll blame the copy and paste on that one. Daniel chapter 5 verse 4 says, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. Now we're going to read a little further down in Daniel chapter 5 here, but that's the scene when this hand comes out and starts writing. His knees are knocking together. He's so frightened. I have to admit, I probably would be too. It comes out of nowhere, starts writing on the wall, and here's the king who just moments before, the part I didn't read, it says they drank wine, praised the gods of gold and silver and brass. They were really living it up, saying, hey, look, we're the greatest country in the world. We are the greatest power around. No one's like us. They'd even gone and gotten the drinking utensils that had been taken from Israel during some of the raids there, and were using those. And it's kind of a way to say even that God couldn't do anything to stop us. So they're there just kind of really bragging about how great they are, and all of a sudden this hand starts writing on the wall, and the king doesn't look so brave anymore. And later on that chapter, in verse 25, Daniel 5, and this was the writing that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. And this is Daniel speaking to the king. You'll see his name there in verse 30, Belshazzar. And Daniel says, this is the meaning, this is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God has numbered thy kingdom and found it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck. Now it's interesting because no one could read the writing on the wall. And that's when the Belshazzar kind of remembered, hey, there was this guy that my dad brought over that he could do stuff like that, and he could interpret dreams, and he could do all kinds of stuff. And so he brought Daniel in and told him he would give him lots of things if he would interpret this for him. And so I find it interesting that just as Daniel has said, hey, look, here's what it means. It means God has judged you, and the Medes and Persians are going to take over your kingdom. And the king's still like, okay, pay the man. And obviously still doesn't have that grasp of the fact that God is about to judge him, and that judgment's coming right then. So they go ahead and put clothe him with scarlet, put the chain of gold about his neck, just like they had promised. And then in verse 30, it says, and that night was Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, slain. And the Medes and the Persians were already at the gates. They were tunneling under at that point while the Belshazzar and his party was going on. And they came in, took the city over, and established their own kingdom. And that's where the Medes and the Persians kind of became the world power, that Medo-Persian empire, which would later end up just being more of a Persian empire, as the Persians would kind of become the main part of that. But so that's the story. I can't imagine a Hollywood scary story that could come out any more frightening than that when that hand appears and starts writing. And then to hear Daniel say, well, let me tell you what it means. It means your time is up. That to me is kind of the double whammy. It's not just that, wow, you just scared me with that hand on the wall thing, but it's then when he interprets it, it's not a good message. This hand on the wall is saying that you've gone too far and you are about to be destroyed. And so that's what happened to Belshazzar. So, all right. I believe that's the last story. Let me double check. Oh, no, there's one more. All right, one more. I forgot about this one. That's what I get for doing the slides and then doing something else. All right, last one, and then we'll be done. Moabite invaders need to bury someone quickly, and they throw him in a tomb. When his body touches the bones in the tomb, he springs to life. Whose tomb was it? So here's your story. Here's your Halloween story, if you want to, your supernatural kind of scary story. these Moabites they're going into Israel, and they're just raiding cities, taking stuff, and going back. And during part of the time, one of them gets killed, and so they need to bury him. And they hear some other people coming, so they know they don't have much time. So they don't have really time to properly bury him. So they see a tomb over there. They throw the body into the tomb, and when the bones touch when the body touches the bones that were already in the tomb, boom, it springs to life. So who was that? Whose tomb was that? Is what I'll say. Whose tomb was that? That's whose bones it was as well. It could ask either way. Whose bones were they, or whose tomb was it? We don't know who the man was. The Bible doesn't tell us that part, other than the fact he was a part of these Moabite invaders. All right, got one answer in. Now, can you imagine the surprise when these fellas throw their friend into this tomb as a kind of a makeshift burial, and boom, see him come back to life immediately? That would be a bit frightening as well. What happened to you? We thought you were dead. In fact, we know you were dead. I can only imagine him trying to explain that, because the fella has no idea either what happened. He's like, why'd you throw me in a tomb? We promised you were dead. I'm clearly not dead. So that one could go a lot of different ways in that story. I can only imagine the way that transpired. Any other guesses for whose tomb this was? I told you they got hard. Again, I was trying to find those kind of unusual Halloween-related stories. You know, all the Halloween stories. Look at the graphic here of the storybook with the haunted house, and they always have a cemetery nearby, and they always have that element of nighttime and death. And so I was trying to kind of go along with that same idea there, just to keep it up. All right, well, I'm only seeing one answer on this one. Maybe that I'm getting a little bit of lag on the feed here, but it may just be that people are still looking. All right, got another answer. I'm going to assume it's lag, so I'm going to go ahead and share the answer. We've already got two people guessing it. I'm guessing the other one's going to be right as well. It is Elisha's tomb, and so you recall Elisha was there's two prophets that are mentioned throughout a lot of that time period. It was Elijah and then Elisha. Elisha being the younger one, the second one on the scene, and he was kind of the understudy for Elijah, and Elijah passed on the power God had given him to Elisha, and Elisha had given counsel to kings, and anyway, in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 20 and 21, we see Elisha's end of his life. Now you remember Elijah, when he died, he didn't really die. He was carried up into heaven, and Elisha got to see him carried away, and that's when he dropped his mantle, and Elisha picked it up. But Elisha didn't go out that way. It says Elisha died, and they buried him. And the bands of Moabites invaded the land in the coming in of the year. And it came to pass, as they were burying a man, that behold, they spied a band of men, and they cast the man into the sepulchre of Elisha. When the man was let down and touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood up on his feet. So that's the story. They're not told anything more about that and why. Just the fact that God had so used Elisha and had so endowed him with the power of the Holy Spirit that even after his bones were laying there, God was still using him to show his power. I think it also shows that it wasn't Elisha that was doing all this stuff. It was God working through him. And even after Elisha was dead and gone, God could still use what was left of him, his bones there, to do whatever he wanted to and to display his power. And so again, we have that kind of neat story of, hey, let's bury him real quick. We got to get out of here. So people are coming. And so they toss him into the sepulcher, this grave, a tomb, probably a cave of some sort that went down. And as soon as he touches the bones of Elisha, he revives and stands up. And so that's just a amazing story. But in all these examples, all these scary stories as I was going through them, the common trait that I want us to see is just the power of God and the fact that God can do anything. And you may be in a situation where you don't know if God can work in your life. You may be in a situation where you wonder if he's going to work in your life. You know, all we have to do is look to the cross to see what God's willing to do. The fact that he would come and walk among us as a man and die on the cross simply to take our place, to take our sin upon him, so that even though we are not perfect, we can have his perfection placed on us. And to see that kind of love says that's a God that not only can do anything, but will do anything. And to me, that's the amazing part of it. You know, there were a lot of people here that thought they could do a lot. These invaders obviously thought they were pretty good at what they did. They're going to go in and steal stuff from these Israelites and go back home, and nobody's going to mess with us. They got to encounter a God that was bigger than them. Sennacherib, he thought he was going to go in and just demolish Jerusalem and finish off this conquest he had been on. And he got to see a God that was greater than him. Belshazzar, he was celebrating how great their kingdom was and how wonderful they were. And he got to see a God that was greater than him. And you know, that's the thing, is all of us at some point get to see a God that's greater than us. And for those of us that know him, that's the beauty of it, is that's the God that's on our side. That's the God that's pulling us through, the God that's going to get you through this week, get you to next week, going to get you through this year, get you into next year. The God that's going to get you past whatever it is you need past. That's the God that has that kind of power. And it's not just some scary movie that somebody wrote and made up. These are examples and tales that God has passed down to show us what he's done in the past and what he can do in our lives in the future. So I hope this week, as you go, like I mentioned, you'll probably be bombarded with lots of Halloween stuff, and if you like that, that's good. It was funny this morning in the sanctuary service, I asked how many people liked being scared by those things. We only had 2 hands go up. I was kind of surprised by that. A lot of people tend to like the scary stuff. I'm not one of them, but we did have a couple people. But you know, as you go through that, just keep in mind that you know, even with those types of stories, and there's always that element of something has to be overcome and defeated or whatever. God's fighting for us. God's on our side, and He's already done the work at Calvary to take away our sin. He's already done the work to show us how much He loves us. And all He asked of us was accept my salvation. And once we've done that, you know, He said He's given us that Holy Spirit to live with us. So I hope this week as you go out, kind of wrapping up here, I get sidetracked a little bit. As you go out, kind of back to this morning, hope you have a week full of power, a week full of love, and a week full of good decisions. That's what He said this morning. He hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me, send me a message through Facebook or Instagram or the other one, YouTube, whichever your favorite way to communicate is. And I'm happy to do whatever I can. Hope you all have a great week. Love you all. Goodbye.